Hey guys, Jamie here. I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been running the Trans Pride Facebook page for about 13 years. I rarely show my own face, rarely talk about myself, but I just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about me, about who I am, about kind of my backstory a little bit, I guess. I don't know if anyone cares about this at all, but I just feel like it would help to get to know me and where I come from a lot of the time with my positions. So I was born and raised in Utah, in a very conservative part of Utah. And I was always just that different kid. I was always like the nerd in the class. I never really got along with anyone. And then even if I did get along with people, oftentimes their parents would say, "Oh, hey, this kid isn't LDS. You can't play with them." Like that happened all the time. I lost so many friends to that mindset that they're not part of this church. They can't, we can't associate with them. And then on top of that, I was always just a little bit different. I'm neurodivergent, so that kind of played a role there. And I'm trans, and I always knew that I was different, gender wise as well. I remember the first time that I knew that I was trans, the first time that, I guess not that I was trans, knew that I was different in my gender realm was when I was in elementary school. And I was bullied relentlessly in elementary school, part of being different and part of not being part of the main culture. But this kid was trying to make fun of me, and they said, "Hey, are you a boy or a girl?" And in that moment, I knew what they expected. I knew that the answer that they expected, the one that was socially right, the one that was, I was just the role that I was expected to fit in. But I also knew that that wasn't who I was. I knew that I wasn't a boy like everyone was expecting me to say. I was a girl. Like that's who I was. And I didn't understand that feeling. Like, this was early 90s, I think. There wasn't really talk about trans people then. There was no real trans visibility, at least not around where I saw, not in the media that I was exposed to, because again, I was in Utah. We didn't have cable often, so we were just limited to what was broadcast in our area. So that was a lot of how I was growing up. Once I got into high school, things got to be a little bit different. I got more expressive with who I was. I got to be dressed a lot more flamboyantly. I was a lot more myself. I was a lot more anti-system. You know, this again was Utah in the late 90s at this point, but it was still very much a rigid society, a closed society. I dated a few people, and again, their parents would be like, "Nope, you can't date them. They're not part of the church." And I can't tell you how many times that happened to me. And oftentimes we would still date secretly. We just couldn't let anyone else know. Yeah, I've always been kind of on the fringe of society no matter where I've been. But as I started to express myself a little bit more in high school, started to let my femininity out a little bit. I didn't come right out and dress as a woman or in women's clothes, but I would, all tailor my clothes to fit a little bit more feminine. I would wear a little bit more flamboyant outfits. I grew my hair out longer. I just wasn't quite afraid to stand out more. I knew I was different, so I was just going to be different. I was going to lean into that a little bit more. And I remember one day in high school, I was talking with this young lady. We were kind of friends, kind of acquaintances. She was one of those that had trouble making friends as well, and so we always just kind of talked to each other, even though we didn't have much in common. We just, were trying to be friendly to each other. But this group of other kids came up behind me and just one of them had a lighter and lit my hair on fire, and it started to go up really quickly. And luckily, my friend, I guess at the time, acted quickly, put it out, and everything like that. But yeah, I was so different in high school that people actually tried to light me on fire. That's a weird thing to say, weird memory to have. But even after that, I didn't let that stop me from expressing myself. That made me lean more into. There was a little bit more talk at this time about trans people, but all the representation was very much in a negative light, very much it was like the trans debate, like, is this even a thing? Who are these people? These are the deviants, much like we see today, but it was just people hadn't been exposed to it as much. So I started to learn a little bit more about who I was. And then I remember seeing a documentary once I moved out, and I actually got cable and started seeing other media. And the internet was bigger at this time, so I was going online more, learning more about other people, other cultures, about people who didn't look like me, people who didn't act like me, people who weren't raised like me. And I remember learning about trans people. And at first, I'll admit I was really transphobic myself. Growing up with all the biases that I was raised with, even though my mom was really progressive. It was the 1980s progressive, like the people who want to be supportive but are still really hesitant about things. So she tried but didn't get it right all the time. And so, I had my own biases from that, from the influences, my friends, and the society that I grew up in. And I was transphobic at first, and a lot of that was just internalized transphobia. I realize now it was struggling to accept who I was because I knew that I was different. I knew that's who I was, but I didn't want to accept that. And with all the representation that I had seen up to that point being so negative, I viewed being trans itself as being negative. But after a couple of years, in the early 2000s, I had actually gotten married at that point, and I realized I was trans, and I started to come out to everyone as trans, and my transition was really slow at that point. My wife at that point, she was very iffy about it. She tried to be supportive, but she didn't quite understand it. She was not a lesbian. She was very much straight. It made her question a lot about herself during it. And she asked that I take my transition very slowly, so I did. I started it in about 2001, 2002. Took a long time for me to actually get there. And by the time I got there, I built a pretty successful career in retail management. I know it's just retail, but I was, good at what I did. I ran one of the most successful stores in the chain, the most profitable store per square foot. I was really proud of what I did. I was, being trained to take the next step in the career to become a district manager, all that. And then I came out as trans to them. And no one else in the company history had ever come out as trans, and they didn't know how to process that. They had to have a lot of meetings with their HR. They had to come up with new policies. And initially, they tried to be supportive. And we had scheduled a meeting for my store staff for me to come out to everyone. But I got a call from my district manager, I believe it was the night before the meeting. And he basically told me just, not to come in again. That they didn't want a trans person as the face of the store, that they didn't think that it was brand appropriate, and that hurt. I mean, I was good at what I did. I don't know how else to say it. Like, there was no reason to let me go. There was no reason, no performance-based reason to say that, hey, this person isn't qualified to do what they're doing. They've even validated that I was good at it because I was getting ready for a promotion. But that was my first experience after I transitioned. Like, literally, as I transitioned, lost my job.